Hi everybody, Mike Napoleon here with SuperSpeed Golf, joined by my good friend Tyler Standifird from out in Utah, and we also have Kyle Shea on the webinar. He'll be moderating and watching some questions. Just a few housekeeping things here before we get going. If you have any questions, we're going to go through a very short little presentation, but if you have any questions that you would like to ask during that portion of the webinar, please type them in the Q&A panel down at the bottom, and we'll be sure to get to all of those questions as we go. We're really excited for this webinar in particular, as this is the culmination, I think, of a lot of work, research, and I know from my history as a golf coach and Kyle working with a lot of people physically, we saw these issues arising with the way people grip the golf club, and then really talking to every single one of them about, how did that relate to their own capacity or power of grip strength, and how that relates into how much grip pressure they should have on the golf club. I think it's a commonly talked about element in the world of golf, but it hasn't been studied very much. And that's really where we've started to bring Tyler in as well, in the development of our protocols for our brand new SuperSpeed Squeeze, to really find a easy, efficient way to help clear up what I think, Tyler and Kyle, might be one of the biggest epidemics affecting speed and power in the world of golf.
And I'll add, Mike, I think sometimes in the research related to this field, I think we've gone away from some really practical things. And I think researchers are, focusing on, crazy pressure points and alpha torques and gamma torques and all these kind of things. When in reality, I think there's so much low hanging fruit to the idea of again, what is important about strength in the golf swing, and why is it important, and how can we train it in a really basic way. And so I've loved to kind of dive into just these practical things, putting this in the golfer's hands and seeing what actually happens to the things that are the most important. So,
well, as much as I like to talk shop about all of the crazy biomechanics and ground force stuff, I can nerd out with anyone. We've done that many, many times and had a lot of fun with it. Stupid simple is also really important sometimes. Like, keeping things just so simple is really important. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to go through a little presentation. Remember, type in some questions. If there's anything that comes up that you'd like to ask us about, we're going to answer it all. So here we go. I think where I'd like to start with all of this is really talking about how this is going to relate to something you've probably heard us talk about in the past, which is our speed pyramid model. That model really looks at how the mechanics of the golf swing affect speed and power. And we talk about that, looking at how a player uses the ground, how those forces and torques affect the way that person sequences and creates rotational speed, and then how that rotational speed of the golf swing is translated directly into club head speed when we hit the ball. And that piece of the pyramid, that top piece, is what we're really going to be looking at today in a couple different respects, looking at how our connection to the club, our hands or our grip, is going to be able to efficiently work to be able to get us the most club speed from all of the other stuff that we're able to produce with our body. Now, the way I want to start talking about this today and really looking is kind of the background of two concepts: grip strength, which we're going to define just as how many, how hard could you squeeze something if we're just giving you a static measurement. And, we use devices. All of the data that we're going to show you has been collected on dynamometers, which is a device that allows you to squeeze it, and it measures grip strength. So it's going to measure grip strength in how many kilograms of strength you can produce. Now, the data that we've collected, we've also used a certain type of dynamometer, which allows us to make the part that we're squeezing skinnier or more similar to a golf grip, so that we can measure sort of effective grip strength that you'd be able to produce on a golf club. So that's kind of some of the details. Now, grip strength is not the same thing as grip pressure. One of the most common questions that we've gotten since the launch of the SuperSpeed Squeeze last week for pre-orders is, well, I thought everybody always told us that we're supposed to grip the club extremely lightly. Okay, I agree with that as a golf coach. I think that is what we say. I think it's in many respects, the best way that we can grip the golf club is not to create like a death grip kind of scenario where we're tensing up and not going to be able to utilize full mobility in our arms and wrists. So the big question is, how does grip strength and then the amount of grip pressure that we use during the swing related? Well, this is where the data gets really cool. Starting to move on and look into this in a little bit more detail. I've got some data here that we've collected, and then we've also gotten some of this data from TPI in a similar fashion, looking at how static grip strength, so that measurement on the dynamometer, is going to compare in different segments of our golfing population. Tyler, I like to start with tour players. I think we talk about tour data so much, right?
Yeah,
tour players, on average, we see about a 60 kilogram measurement of static grip strength on that dynamometer on that skinnier setting. Now, in general, we always see players with their lead hand creates a little bit more grip strength statically than their trail hand. And that's an interesting point too, because most of those people, that's their non-dominant hand. Now, that's kind of consistent with other research as well, right, Tyler?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we see across the board in terms of lead hand, trail hand, in terms of kind of any sport, any population, you'd see those same things because of what that left hand tends to do in holding things as we do different various movements, right?
Yeah, so what I've got here on this chart is lead hand, kilograms of grip strength, trail hand kilograms of grip strength, and then just an average of those two to look at combined. So to keep this simple, we see that tour players can create about 60 kilograms of grip strength. If we move up to the most powerful athletes in the golfing world, we're going to look at our long drive competitors, they can create significantly more grip strength than even PGA Tour players. In fact, we're looking at usually over 80 kilograms of grip strength. Now, how does this look if we go down and start looking at amateurs? And this is a lot of our own data that we've collected over years back running our academies. Looking at this, we see that amateur males, and I do want to just note on this data set, there's significantly more males in this data set than females. So I think it was about 87 male golfers and about 12 female golfers is what's in this data set. So just note that the average for amateurs combined got to 40, but that's because this data set is skewed with more male golfers than female. Male golfers on average, looking at that combined, are only creating about 42 kilograms of grip strength. Females are even lower. They're down around that 27 range on average. Now, what does that mean as we relate it to the golf swing? Well, I think it's a very simple thing. Our theory for a long, long time has been that tour players, being able to create more grip strength, are then, able to control the club and have a lot more options in how they control the club in their golf swing, and able to do a lot of the different technical pieces that we need with the wrists and forearms in a more efficient way. Okay, well, what I like is that there's data on this. We know how much pressure players are producing on the grip of the golf club and when it happens during the golf swing. So I think it's really cool to look at that and relate that data of how much pressure is going into the golf swing back to how much total grip strength those players can create. So here's what we got. If we look at our long drive players, the strongest players in the world, dynamically in the swing, and we've converted this back to kilograms just for sake of comparison. Long drive players during the transition of the golf swing, which is when we see the most pressure is applied to the grip of the golf club during that process, at peak, produce about 44 kilograms of strength or pressure into the grip, and that's about 50%, 53% of their max. No, I would say that this looks pretty consistent with a lot of what we've coached for a long time. This isn't going to feel like a death grip on the golf club. It's not going to be that extreme tight feeling grip that you're going to have. This is probably going to feel very loose to these players, and a lot of those players will tell you that they feel like they don't grip the club as hard as they can by any means. It's about 50% with those players. Tour players, little bit less during the golf swing. We're at about 35 kilograms of pressure dynamically, and that's about 58% of their max. Now, again, looking at this from a percentage standpoint, I think that still falls into that category of we're not death gripping the golf club. As we get to amateurs, and here I pulled out male amateurs in this data set, peak there we're seeing about 32 kilograms of pressure during the process of the golf swing. And that's a different situation. Now we're at over 75% of that player's max. Now, Tyler, just looking at this from a biomechanics side, if I'm at 75% of my capacity, I mean, is that a pretty big percentage compared to, what we're seeing differently here with these professional athletes?
Yeah, again, we start looking at things like the amount of muscles you're recruiting, the motor units that you have going on, right? The fatigue that would take place as a result. You would see all that increase the closer you get to your maximum. And I think as you described, this can create some scenarios where that golfer is going to really tense up through the hands and forearm. Again, they need enough grip strength to be able to deliver the club the way they want, but in overkill is these percentages that get too high. And I think this is where this idea of relating the percentages to the actual raw values to what they can produce max becomes really important.
Now, I'm interested in more data when we start to talk about women. So female players, at that peak that we're seeing in that 27 range, I definitely want to get some more data on exactly what's going on during the swing dynamically with women. But theoretically here, this could be a major problem. Like if we look at the trend of what we're seeing compared to max, this is probably going to be a pretty high percentage of max that we're looking at with most females. I also think it's important to note that there's a certain amount of pressure you've got to put on the grip of the golf club during the swing for it not to go flying out onto the golf course.
Yeah, I mean, this is from a biomechanical principle, like this is what I love to talk about, because I just talked to my students about this. And the example I give them is like if they put a sandal on their foot and start rapidly flexing and extending, swinging their knee, like that sandal will fly off their foot. Like that is what will happen. And so there's this principle called centripetal acceleration, which is produced by a force that helps tie objects like that back to the axis of rotation. So in this scenario, it's your hands producing a force on that grip so that that club head and the golf club stays in connection with your hand and can travel in an arc, like you said, instead of kind of flying off down the driving range. And I think what tends to happen, Mike, is that, we know that the goal of golf is to keep that golf club in our hands. And so, my theory, and I think what we see a lot is this idea that when people don't have that grip strength, when they're producing a really small percentage and also a really small raw value, they'll just adjust by swinging that golf club a little bit slower so that it doesn't fly out of their hands. Because the faster the club is moving, the more you're going to need that centripetal force and acceleration to keep that club attached to your hands.
Yeah, and we can even see that in this data set here. As you get up toward those long drive professionals, they're swinging the club a lot faster. They are creating more pressure on the grip during the swing. And I think that's a very key point. And, the other thing I like to see here from a coaching perspective is what are the other compensations somebody is going to make if they don't have enough grip strength to be able to do some of these things. I mean, these are things we see all the time as golf coaches. Maybe it's a player that wears out their glove all the time because the club's rotating in their hands a little bit during the swing. They're not able to control the face of the club as well because, again, they're having to either grip it too tightly or they don't have enough grip strength to be able to allow that club to move the right way during the swing. I think another big piece that we see a lot here is the difference of the way you see tour players get through the rough and the way you see amateur players get through lies in the deep rough. I mean, that's just a totally different thing. Like the stability of the club head with tour players through the rough is so much better than it is for most amateur players. And I think this is a major factor to that of what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I would say, Mike, we actually got a question from Roy, and I think this is maybe a good time to jump in because I think there are definitely times in your round where you're going to creep higher on that percentage list, and Mike brought up one scenario, which is thick rough. These scenarios where you've got to really control the club face through impact. I think when you're really trying to bomb a drive out there, if you look at some of the long drive guys, you look at, I've seen great pictures of Rory coming through the swing, like those muscles are bulging. They are gripping that tighter because they need more force as that club head starts moving faster. So I think, Roy, you're exactly right. There definitely are those times in the swing where we are going to need to up that thick rough, really fast swing speeds. That grip, the amount of grip pressure you use is going to go up.
I think another piece that we see a lot is another way to reduce the amount of pressure you need on this in order to control the club is to do what? Is to early release it. So if you're that player that casts the club or has a big early release problem, again, sometimes a major contributing factor to that issue in your swing is just that you don't have enough strength to really be able to stabilize the lag that you're creating during the transition in your golf swing. So, kind of wild stuff here. I think this is really cool stuff. I think this is another major epidemic in the world of golf, contributing to lack of club speed, and then other things with control and consistency of face and those. So the next piece we want to look at is, how do we train this? Well, I can tell you how we used to train it at our golf academy, and that's that we had people lift things that were really heavy. And we had our players on gym programs where they were using dumbbells and they were using kettlebells or barbells or various different types of equipment where they had to grip it. They create a grip on those different implements, and they were heavy and they had to lift them. I remember all the time, like farmers walks, where you'd have people warming up for golf sessions, and they'd be doing farmers walks like around our academy. That's a real common thing that you would see in the gym. The interesting part here, which I think is little athletes that are in the gym, they don't have enough strength to in their hands to be able to hold onto the bar while the bigger muscles of their body are working. We can definitely see deficiencies there on the gym side as well.
Mike, and you're breaking up just a little bit, so let me just kind of reiterate just kind of quickly what Mike's talking about, which is the traditional way to train grip strength. And this is something, again, with my background in exercise science, it's something that I've read about, looked at a lot. And one of the big things it is what Mike is discussing and picturing here, which is if I lift something really heavy, either in an isolated situation, meaning I grab a heavy dumbbell, I walk around the gym, I grab a heavy kettlebell, I walk around the gym, that can be a really effective way to train it. But also just doing heavy lifts, these heavy deadlifts and movements where grip is something that we're going to utilize to accomplish that task. Again, those are good ways to train grip strength. If we have access to those settings, if we have access to all these really, really heavy weights to train, but again, not the most transferable directly to a golf swing.
Yeah, sorry about that if it was breaking up a little bit. Moving on, one of the other things that we would do with players that had deficiencies in grip strength in the gym was use fat grips. So, this is a really common thing you see in gym training that works on grip strength. Making that grip bigger on a barbell actually makes your hands and forearms work harder to hold on to it, activates more muscles. So that's kind of another kind of key segue as where we developed the SuperSpeed Squeeze, which is essentially, like a fatter grip that can actually fit on the golf club so that you can go through various exercises that we've developed using this directly on your golf club and getting some of that kind of golf specific feel to this training. This is actually what it looks like. So this is the protocol that we've developed for the SuperSpeed Squeeze. We've done a number of different things here. One of them is single hand holds. So that's literally going to have this on a golf club, and you're just going to hold the club in a hand, isometrically squeeze it as hard as you can, and then release for 5 seconds. So it's kind of a 5 on, 5 off rotating hands. We do that same thing with 2 hands. You can do that in your golf grip, or you can do that with your hands split if it's more comfortable. Another cool exercise I think here is the quick burst. Those quick bursts are kind of like fast on and off kind of bursts, where we're going to do those kind of in a series to be able to max out those things. And then the coolest part about this training aid is that now we're going to actually take golf swings with it, which is where I think we're seeing a lot of the kind of maximum transference of more grip strength directly into the swing. All of those swings, we're going to do non-dominant swings, and we're going to do dominant side swings. Half of those swings, the first 5, we're going to do gripping as aggressively as we can and not worrying as much about club speed. The last 5, we're going to not worry as much about gripping as hard as we can, and we're going to worry about trying to make that club move as fast as you can. So that's kind of how we apply this to what we're doing. Now, Tyler's already done some data collection on this protocol. This is what we saw just in a 4-week kind of trial study, if you will, on this. We'll have a lot more data to this soon.
Yeah, and this was kind of a fun little study, as Mike suggested, trying to dial in the right stimulus for these, what exercises work the best. Mike discussed the quick on and off. The research in the way golfers utilize pressure, there's a couple key things. One is that it peaks around transition. The second one is that golfers tend to work between like higher and lower pressures rather quickly. And so that's why we kind of like some of that on and off, as well as actually swinging a golf club with it. So again, this was a data set that included older individuals, female golfers who are golfers we really, know struggle with this issue. But then I also like that it included our traditional maybe 30 to 50 male golfer, even ones who had been doing some of the traditional things in the gym that we discussed. And across the board, we saw increases in strength, both in kind of just straight standing, but also in golf posture. And again, I always like to tie things into driver speed. So if I can throw them on a TrackMan and see what happens to driver speed, we saw an average right around a 1.5 to 2 mile per hour gain in driver swing speed as a result of the training as well.
And again, that was just in 4 weeks. And this is a training that, people can do this 3 times a week, every day. You could even do it multiple times a day. I will say that, going through this now in the testing, it's interesting. You'll definitely feel it. Like you feel it in your hands after you've gone through this training for the first week or so. I've been doing it, regularly now for about 2 months, and I don't feel it nearly as much after I do a session now with the actual squeeze. Okay. Well, let me get out of this real quick. That's what we got for you on the data and the background and why we did this. I think we should hop into some questions.
All right, Mike, we've got one of our favorite guys, Al Vermeil, asking some questions for us. Al, good to talk with you. Long time no talk. Do amateurs use high percentages of grip strength in transition because they lower total maximum grip strength?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're seeing. What the data is showing is that because players who have, let's call it a grip strength deficiency, if we have a player that has a grip strength deficiency, they're not going to let go of the club. They're, possibly going to early release or cast it a little bit to reduce some of what's there. But they're going to do the best they can to try to hold on to that thing and create what they're trying to do during the transition of the swing. So what we see with those players is that they're going to use a much higher percentage of their max, which again, I also think is not the most optimal way to go about the situation, because you're going to get, some reduction in mobility and things like that when you get too high of a percentage there. We just did a seminar in San Antonio and had a very accomplished PGA professional in the audience. So, who's played in the PGA Championship a few times, done really well in the Club Pro Championship many years. And, we were doing this presentation there just a couple weeks ago, and he made a comment. He said, I've always felt like I've gripped the club extremely tight, compared to a lot of the other players that are at my level. And we found it very interesting. We tested him there on a dynamometer to see what his grip strength was, and it was below 40 kilograms. So, this is somebody that at a high level has kind of made that realization that he had to grip it a lot tighter in order to be able to control the club the way he wanted to. I don't think that's the most efficient way to go about it. I think the better way to go is increase your grip strength so you have more capacity, and then you're going to be able to actually grip the club at a lower percentage of your max, which should give you a lot more flexibility when you do get into the deep rough and have to create more, or have to step on it a little bit to hit a drive, all those kind of different things that go. But yeah, glad that you were here today, Al. It's been a long time.
Thanks, Mike. Sam's got a couple of questions here. I think it's good to maybe reiterate about what people might be seeing with their glove wear patterns. I think that's a really cool key that you brought up, Mike. And then he's asking about lead hip wear. And then also, does this lead into people maybe wanting or starting to use larger in diameter grips on their actual golf clubs?
Man, there's a lot to unpack in that one. As far as the glove wear situation, that tends to happen when the club is shifting or turning during the player's golf swing. At some point in the swing, that glove is shifting or turning or moving a little bit in their hand. I would say that can definitely be a sign that somebody might have a grip strength deficiency, because a lot of times, if they can't produce enough pressure, the club can have a tendency to move. There's other things that could be a problem there too, though. That's just one. As far as larger grips for golfers, I think it's worth testing. I think if you have a player, again, that has a grip strength deficiency, it's possible that they could create more pressure on a slightly wider grip or a slightly larger grip than they can on a very narrow one. So that might be something that's definitely worth testing. If you have somebody that has a lot of grip strength that doesn't have a deficiency, I don't think there's as big of I don't think there would be as big of a differential there. I think I think that person would have more options. They could kind of do whatever. They could use a smaller grip or a larger one. But yeah, testing the larger grip with some players that have deficiencies could definitely be on our list of things to test. Would you agree with that, Tyler?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd jump in there just because I've played around with the dynamometer settings in terms of creating a larger grip versus a smaller grip. And you can for sure see that you get too wide and the grip strength goes down. You get too narrow, like kind of what we're simulating with the golf, and you'll see a drop off in a lot of these that I tested grip strength. And if you get them a little bit wider, they actually can tend to generate more grip strength. And so I think you're right on, Mike. As someone asked a question, do I think a smaller grip is better for someone with kind of weaker grip? And I would assume weaker grip strength. I almost think it would be the opposite, where actually they would probably do better with a little bit larger grip. But again, I think this is where we can get into some of those fitting details. But again, my hypothesis in the data would suggest a larger grip for those with weaker grip strengths.
Tyler, Mike, a lot of people are going to be interested in how to test their grip strength. You mentioned the dynamometer. Should people be buying their own dynamometer? Be worth it? Do you have a recommendation there? And if so, is there a benchmark they're looking for to try to reach as an amateur golfer?
I mean, look, I think the more the merrier is kind of where this kind of falls. Like, I don't think that grip strength is something that, a tour level player should just magically have more of than an amateur. I think that kind of like, especially for male golfers, around that 60 mark is a pretty good benchmark. I think 50 is probably minimum where I wouldn't consider it to be deficient. For females, we need a lot more data. We have tested some LPGA Tour players. I know that you have that. There's a question in there about that. In general, like even on the LPGA Tour, we're seeing, it's very rare for us to see over 40 kilograms. We're going to generally see somewhere in the 30s. We'll have more data on that to come for sure. But over 40 kilograms is pretty rare that we're seeing on the LPGA Tour. I think when you look at the types of swings that you see in general on the LPGA Tour, there are very few of those that look like John Rahm, who's has a lot of downswing loading in the swing, a lot of lag. You tend to see much longer swings out there. So there are some differences there. I'm not necessarily saying that LPGA Tour players need to have more grip strength than PGA Tour. I doubt probably a different bar there that we just know there's, I would say, rampant deficiency.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. The biomechanical principle there is this idea of either impulse or work, which is force applied over time. And when you lack grip strength, you tend to want to apply that for longer periods of time. Otherwise, you can't generate the same speed. So I think those LPGA players are swinging a little bit differently. The question, I think the last part of that question, Kyle, was like, should everyone be walking around with one of these dynamometers to test grip strength? I think if you're as a coach and you're working with players of various skill levels, I think it's a relatively cheap way to add something to your arsenal that would be very, very beneficial for your players, and grip strength should be assessed. I think if you're just kind of a casual, player, maybe it's not important for you to spend a couple $100 on a dynamometer. If you get one that's a nice one. I know there's ones out there for $20-$30. And again, maybe you get a little bit what you pay for. I think having a nice one that can measure things accurately would be almost essential for coaches.
I think if you're a coach, a coach should have a good dynamometer. If you're not testing grip strength on your players, you're missing a major factor that could affect massive amounts of things in the golf swing. Every coach should have a dynamometer, a good one. If you're an amateur golfer, I think one of the less expensive ones might be fine. I don't even necessarily think you need it unless you're curious, but I'd definitely go tell your golf coach they need to have one if they don't have one. And then honestly, there's no downside to doing this training with the squeeze. So I know Roy's asking a question about what exercises we recommend for grip strength. Again, there's a lot, like the isometric type holds, the quick burst type stuff, and then being able to actually swing the golf club and have that more golf specific motion while using this device. Those are the things we're finding to be the most effective. Obviously, tons of exercises in the gym are also going to be effective, but allowing that big like golf specific transfer piece is a big key there that I think we're looking at. I definitely think that transfer is what we're seeing in that initial study.
Howard kind of asked the same things, right? There definitely are other ways to test and train grip strength. I think the real benefit from this is that in my experience with exercise, specificity starts to trump things unless you have all the time in the world to do all this general training and then move to specific. And so, if I had an option between giving someone something that they can just squeeze over and over again versus something that they could put on a golf club, mirror golf postures, mirror golf swings, do some of that stuff, it's just going to transfer so much better to the golf swing.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a great point, Tyler. Still doing the stuff in the gym, but same with like the super speed clubs. You can do speed training in the gym, and sometimes it doesn't carry over to actual golf club when you're swinging. It's kind of the same principle here.
And to Edward's point that he asked about tour players working on their grip pressures or grip strength, I don't think Greg at TPI would have any problems with me sharing this. If you've been there to events, and I've been really, it's been a privilege to be there at events and watch them. Like, that is a device, his dynamometer. He always knows where it is. He can find it literally in like 5 seconds. No matter what's going on there, he can always find it. And so to answer that question, that's for sure something they worry about. That's for sure something they're trying to train. But as I talked about, even with players who are doing the traditional strength training stuff, they use this product and still their grip strength was increased as a result. And so I think, again, the specificity of this is really going to help players gain grip strength.
Thanks, Tyler. There's an interesting question here about the individual fingers and grip strength and tests. Do you guys have any input on that?
We don't have any data. We've only measured actual total production out of the hand because you do actually use all parts of your hand in your grip when you're on the golf club during the swing. So it is important in a general sense. I know there's research out there showing exactly where those pressure points are going to be to optimize in certain areas of the swing. Where there's also a lot of variance on exactly where those pressure points are when you measure the best players in the world. So I would say on that, absolutely. I think there's more data and there's more research to be done. I think in a very general sense, though, looking at the overall strength of the overall unit of your hand, fingers, wrist, forearm is more what we're testing, because that's really the exact practical piece that's being used during the golf swing motion that we're looking at and trying to improve.
And I might add, Mike, from a data collection standpoint, again, I've looked at a lot of this research. Those pressure traces, Mike talked about the variance in those from player to player. That's totally true. And I can't decide if that variance is because there truly is variance in the where they're pressuring it and different things like that, or that just our measurement tools for that are so poor right now that we're just not collecting great data. And so I think that's where we understand really well that overall grip strength is important. Percentage of grip strength is important. And so I think that's kind of what we're going after with this, because we know it will translate well. And hopefully as we get better equipment to test some of that stuff, we're going to understand those things more and more.
And again, like everything else that we do at SuperSpeed Golf, we look for training products that are going to help every single person that picks it up. You know, whether you're a long drive professional that already has, 80 kilograms of grip strength and wants a little more, or you're, an average player that is very deficient and that's causing all kinds of problems. You can't hit it out of the rough. The club slips in your hands sometimes, all of those things. Everyone's going to get a benefit. There's literally no downside to doing this training and improving grip strength. There's just no downside. It's a big positive for everyone that's going to touch it.
Mike, if somebody on their golf clubs already has a grip that's more mushy, say like a wind type of grip versus a more firm grip, is there any implication in how much that's going to influence their grip strength / pressure during the swing?
That's a very good question. Again, we don't have specific data on different grip types. I can say that a bigger grip, most people can grip a bigger grip slightly stronger than they can grip a skinny grip, if that makes sense. It doesn't really matter for this training. I mean, the SuperSpeed Squeeze is going to fit over all of them. It's tapered inside so it doesn't fly off the club, and pretty easy.
Perfect.
Easy question there. But yeah, again, there's a lot of questions that we're going to do more research on and find more details on, but those are some really cool areas to look at in the future.
Al's got another question for us about people with arthritis. I think this is obviously a very common issue with golfers, talking about his trail hand being stronger than his lead hand and maybe some of the implications of that versus if you possibly are training one hand versus another to catch up, if you would say that.
Yeah, so I want to start this one with a disclaimer. I mean, I'm not a doctor by any means or a physical therapist. Tyler can talk a little bit more from the sports medicine side when we get into there. But first of all, I wouldn't recommend anybody do this training if they have pain in their hands, gripping something on a very basic level. Now, that being said, I do think that this might be a tool that a lot of physical therapists potentially could use with players that have some of those type of issues in their hands. Because again, there's very little downside in many ways to strengthening the musculature of your hands. And Tyler, you want to expand on that for
again? I'm going to put on my sports medicine research hat from my PhD days, where I actually studied arthritis. And I think more and more of the research now with arthritis, again, the disclaimer is if there's a considerable amount of pain, of course, we do not want you doing that. I want this to be very clear, but more and more now, exercise is thought to be an incredible therapy modality for people with arthritis. I think when done in appropriate dosages and at appropriate times. And so, Al, I think to answer that question, again, if it's not this debilitating arthritis that prevents you from doing all activities, and if you're still playing golf regularly with your arthritis, I would feel very comfortable with you doing this program. And I think there would be some benefits for you. If it's starting to affect your everyday activities of life and you're not playing golf because of it and all those things, then I think we need to be a little more careful.
And the second part of that question I think is really cool. Can my trail hand being stronger than my lead hand cause my hands to extend? I'm guessing you're thinking like an early release type motion at the start of the downswing. We don't have, again, specific study done on this yet. I can tell you that from my experience as a golf coach, when you do run into a player that tends to have some type of lead side deficiency. So if we're seeing a major lead side strength deficiency, I remember specifically I had a player who was doing some rehab on some various parts of their body. They'd had some injuries, and during that rehab process, the left side of their body, left arm, left hand, left forearm was much weaker than the right side, and this was a right-handed player. That was a player that definitely struggled in the early release category there, creating downswing loading in the swing. So again, that would be more of a clinical observation that I've made, but I think that would be a cool thing to study. I think there's something there for sure.
Thanks, Mike. Interesting question again from Sam. What's the largest grip available? If it's swing grips, I guess, were we talking Jumbo Max style there? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I don't know. If you're talking about the squeeze only comes in one size, and we haven't found that there's really a benefit there in a lot of ways. If anything, we might make a bigger version at some point, but you know, it seems like this is big enough for just about all hand sizes to activate all the muscles we're trying to train. So there may be some other versions in the future, but for right now, it's pretty good as is.
Yeah, and I didn't have any, just to follow up with that, I had various hand sizes in the study, small and large hands, and I didn't have anyone come back and say, man, this was really difficult to put my hands around, or it was too small for my grips. I think it's, as Mike described, I think it's going to work for hands of most shapes and sizes.
Perfect. Well, the Squeeze will be available here soon. We're going with pre-orders right now through all our international websites, plus our USA website. If you want to get it, looks like shipping this month and some into January for the international websites. And then we have all the protocols on our website, along with a great video of Mike summarizing a lot of what he put in this webinar. Everyone who's attending will have a recording coming their way tomorrow morning, so be on the lookout for that. If anyone else has any more questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. Mike, we've got one more here from Al.
Al's hammering us here.
Yeah. Weakness in the lead hand affect arm rotation and extension of arms past impact.
Yeah, it certainly could. You know, anything that's going to be a weakness in strength, you know, as we're starting to get to the point where the club is moving really fast in the golf swing, could have a major effect. Now, again, specifics of cause and effect here, that's kind of where I would say we just need a lot more information. We need more data. We need more research on these specific types of things. But, you know, again, let's go back to the main thought here. The main basis of a lot of this is that if I'm not able to hold this, if I can't create enough grip strength to hold this tight enough to be able to control it over during the swing, I'm going to have to use so much of what I'm capable of producing. I'm going to have to use so much of what I'm capable of producing to affect, because I'm now activating so many of the motor units in my hand. It's going to affect mobility in there, affect how I use that hand, because I'm having to activate too many of the muscles that are going on in my grip during the golf swing. So I would say, in a general, weakness in grip strength, weakness in the lead hand, things that could possibly go on during the golf swing.
Yeah, and I would add there, and I think Mike's alluding to this too, but like fatigue becomes an issue here too. So the more motor units we're going to recruit for a given task, the more we're going to fatigue those muscles associated with the movement. And so I think when you get to these higher percentages, I think as that round progresses, we're going to get a lot more fatigue to set in with those muscles. And I think if you could lower that percentage, you know, it's the idea of I can run a lot further at slower paces than I can at higher paces because of the reduced, you know, motor activation, muscle activation. Yep. So I think later rounds, that might be a cool thing to look at too. So.
Yeah, I think that's another very, very different thing. Like the fatigue factors are also definitely there. Okay. Any others, Kyle?
Yeah. Ed's just asking, he wants to add 10 miles an hour swing. How long is that going to take? That's definitely a combo of everything we've got. If you guys want to discuss any of that and how it
it depends on what you've done so far. So like if you haven't done super speed training, you know, get the 3 club super speed set, because that's going to be an average of about a 5% gain right off the bat. I'd say 8 to 10 weeks regular practice on that get you there. C club training, if you add that on, we tend to see about an additional 4% gain there. You know, this grip strength training is going to be really valuable for those that have deficiencies. You know, so if that's you, you know, this is definitely going to be a beneficial factor on all of those different sides. So Yeah, I think you can do it over the winter for sure if you get involved in a lot of those different training methods.
Tyler, can you talk about any inflammation that might happen within the elbow? I think that's a great question. We've also got a lot of people probably hitting off mats this time of year, so that can obviously inflame it.
Yeah, I think as Bob's talking about this idea, he's asking again if we can train and then get actually lead elbow inflammation. So again, if we're talking kind of golfer's elbow, tennis elbow type stuff, again, so all of these muscles that we're talking about that we're training are attached to the elbow and then pass out through the hand. And so I would for sure say anytime you're overly activating this muscle, obviously there's always kind of risk for that inflammation. I think that's where I would suggest that as you start these protocols, start them out the way that they're outlined, which is doing them just 3 times a week, just doing them the 2 cycles. I think this is a stimulus that isn't going to be too much. And in fact, I would say that most of the research in those kind of worlds suggests that the stronger you can make these muscles, the less likely you are to experience some of those issues, especially when that stress is placed over a period of time. And in fact, a lot of really good research that isometric, like these grip strength holds, tend to be things that really can strengthen some of those tendons, which is where this inflammation is that you're talking about. And so I actually think what we're going to see is potentially the opposite. Again, when done at the proper dosage, which is what we outlined, we're going to see those muscles get stronger and have some more benefit. I think if you're experiencing that pain, Kyle brought up hitting off of mats, a little bit more of a jarring kind of impact through there. Gosh, I always look at kind of things you're doing in your sleep posture to affect those muscles. I think that can be a big part of it. So I think elbow inflammation is tied into a lot of other things. I think this is actually going to be beneficial for those types of issues.
All right, that looks like all the questions.
Okay, well, we really appreciate everybody coming and hanging out with us for a little while today. I hope you got some good information. Like I said, Squeeze pre-orders are live on the website. Go check that out. Until next time, get out there and get after some speed.